In December of 1944, 3 American soldiers found themselves lost in a cold mountain forest a long way from home. They had been fighting in the Battle of the Bulge and now found it impossible to find their way back to Allied lines. To make things worse, one of them had been badly wounded. On their third day in the forest, Christmas Eve, they stumbled across a hunting cabin. Tired and cold, they knocked on the door. It opened, and before them stood a German woman named Elizabeth. She was sheltering there with her son since their home had been bombed out. And now she had a decision to make, because giving shelter to enemy soldiers was a crime the Nazis punished by execution. She noticed the Americans looked rough, but they were a little older than boys. One was so weak, he was laying in the snow at her door. Besides, they were armed. They could have just broken in if they had wanted to. She didn't speak English and they didn't speak German, but they were able to communicate through some broken French. So she welcomed them in and started to prepare a Christmas Eve meal. Not too long after that, there was another knock on the door. It was the Germans, 4 of them. She went out and they warmly wished her a Merry Christmas and explained they were cold and they were hungry. Elizabeth told them they were welcome, but there were others inside. The German corporal took on a different tone, and he asked, were there enemies inside the cabin? Were there Americans in there? She said, indeed, there were 3 Americans inside, and that, like the Germans, they too were cold and hungry. She then courageously said, it's Christmas Eve, it is the holy night, and there will be no shooting here. She convinced the German soldiers to leave their weapons outside, and asked the Americans to do the same. This being done, the Germans joined the Americans inside, and an uneasy truce started. As the chicken and potatoes cooked, the warmth of the cabin and the smell of a fresh meal relaxed these mortal enemies. In fact, one of the Germans had been to medical school, and he tended to the wounded American. The American would live, but had lost a lot of blood and just needed some rest and some food. The German soldiers then added bread and wine to the meal, and they all sat down to eat. As Elizabeth said grace, her son noticed tears in the eyes of exhausted Germans and Americans. A small but meaningful Christmas miracle had happened at their cabin in the woods. The next morning, the soldiers all collected their weapons. The German corporal provided a map and a compass to the Americans so they could go around and avoid German-occupied territory. They shook hands and departed and left in opposite directions. The story reminds me that if this mother, her son, and mortal enemies can find a little Christmas cheer, I probably can too. It's been a rough year, but we've got a lot of things to be grateful for. I hope it encouraged you too. My wish for you is that this coming year will be filled with meaning, with triumph, with lots of prosperity, and I wish you a very Merry Christmas.